Madam Secretary, it's good to see you again. Welcome back to the Hill Center, this time virtually, not in person.
Well, it's great to be with you, Bill, and I'm sorry that we can't be there in person because it's been fun.
We'll do that again. Congratulations to the new book, Hell and Other Destinations, which I very, very much enjoyed. Congratulations. This book is different than your other books. I've read 2 or 3 of your other books, interviewed you about a couple of them. In this one, you really kind of let your hair down.
Yeah.
Tell a lot of great stories, kind of bouncing around all over. It must have been fun for you to write.
Well, it was. And the reason I decided to write it is that, and I kind of say it right up front, people ask me how I want to be remembered. And I say, I don't want to be remembered. I'm still here. But as I try to explain to people what I'm doing now and why I'm doing all the different things, it does try to explain what I'm doing and how they knit together. And I've also said, and you've heard me say this, is that I always think that what I need to be doing at the moment should be more interesting than what I did before. Not easy if you've been Secretary of State, but I really am doing a lot of interesting things, and I try to relate how they go together. And then I tell stories about the things that have happened to me, and it surprises people that I actually have a sense of humor. So I had to try that out.
Well, I thought I knew you pretty well, and I follow you pretty well, but I was just blown away by how many things you are involved in. There is hardly a board or commission on the face of the planet that you have not either founded or you're on the board of or the head of. I mean, did you ever learn to say no?
No, I can't say no. That's not my thing, which is actually why I'm having such a terrible time now because I'm an extrovert and I've here been under house arrest and I'm trying to learn to be an introvert and I'm finding that hard. But the whole thing really did begin as we were leaving the State Department and people were saying, well, are you going to go back to teaching or are you going to give speeches or are you going to write a book or what about the National Democratic Institute that you've loved so much? And how about starting a business? And I said, fine, all of them. And that I wouldn't choose. And I really do believe this, Bill, is that they go together and what I do in one place informs another. And so I like doing what I'm doing.
They all do fit together. Now, we all learned, those of us who sort of do this for a living, that part of the price of talking about our new book is that we always are asked questions about the news of the day. So I want to circle back to the book and some stories. But let's start with a little bit. How would you assess the state of American foreign policy today after almost 4 years of Donald Trump?
I think it's a mess. That's a diplomatic term of art. I am just getting ready to teach in the fall semester, and I teach about, I say foreign policy is just trying to get some country to do what you want. So what are the tools? And I teach this course called the National Security Toolbox, and I've done it ever since I left office. And I basically am sitting here, Bill, thinking about how I'm going to teach it this semester. It'll be virtual, but I do think that this is not the America that I know or the one that I represented. Because the United States is AWOL in an awful lot of places. We're not playing the role that I believe we should. President Clinton was the first one who said we were the indispensable nation. It's just that I said it so often, it became identified with me. But there's nothing about the word indispensable that says alone. It's being a partner and being engaged, and we're certainly not doing that. So I am very troubled by where our foreign policy is and America's role in the world at the moment.
And we know we've talked about this because you have this group of former foreign ministers, heads of state like yourself. What do they tell, and you're in touch with them and you meet often, what do they tell you about America's leadership today?
Well, we see each other virtually now a number of times, and they basically are surprised, wondering where we are and why we're not more involved. And by the way, I was at a meeting in March before this all started, really, at the Munich Security Conference, where I've gone a number of years, and where there are a number of former foreign ministers and a number of other dignitaries. And Pompeo and Esper spoke, and they were like from outer space. That it didn't really make any sense to what the other people had been saying about the responsibilities of the system, what's happening to NATO, how we need to relate each other on the economy, and how we deal with cyber, for instance. I mean, just mostly they were so focused on how important the United States was.
And how would you say, or how would you again assess specifically our relationship with Russia?
Well, I think a mixed bag, frankly. I mean, I do think that Trump and Putin do have some kind of a special relationship, and they do talk to each other. It's hard to know from the outside what they really talk about. I do think that we are, as a country, concerned about the kinds of things that the Russians are doing by really trying to separate us from our friends and allies in Europe, and what they're doing in the Middle East.
Mm-hmm.
Where they are systematically, as we prepare to leave, they are systematically exerting their influence there. I'm not, the thing that's hard for me, Bill, is I don't know what are the kinds of things that there's some agreement on that is taking place, whether there are really diplomats trying to work some things out, or whether it's all kind of ad hoc. So from the outside, it looks like kind of a hit or miss relationship where the Russians are actually trying to undermine what we're doing. And when I read the national security strategy, which, by the way, the Trump administration put out earlier than most, but they did see Russia and China and Iran and North Korea as the major threats, but certainly Russia and China.
Do you see our relationship today with China? It seems to be hot or cold, equally murky to read.
I think it's very hard. The only thing that I just see is that it's about as bad as we've ever publicly seen. There's always, by the way, there's always something negative about China in our presidential campaigns. But I don't think I've ever seen things as genuinely unpleasant as they are now. Obviously, with the blaming for the virus, and then things that the Chinese are doing in the South and East China Sea, the other things that they're doing through their very large Belt and Road Initiative. I keep saying the Chinese must be getting very fat because the belt keeps getting larger and larger. But I do think that the relationship is particularly bad at this moment.
Right. Can we recover, and how long would it take?
Well, it depends on who's president, but I do think we can recover. The thing that's interesting about statecraft is that you have to try to look for things in which you can cooperate with a country, and those where you're not going to compromise, and that there is really a struggle of some kind where you can't cooperate, where you're competing. And I do think what has happened, though, is that as we have ceded place, the Chinese are taking up the area in many different ways, some physical and some kind of what's happening with the World Health Organization, for instance, as we've decided to pull out. They are acting more and more. So they are taking up the vacuum space. But I do think that we can and should cooperate with them on climate change and also on trying to sort out some of the issues that are there internationally. But we will compete in terms of what they're doing in the South and East China Sea and for navigation rights and trying to figure out how we operate together. So, but that is statecraft.
Are you in touch with in touch with the vice president, former Vice President Joe Biden, or his top advisors?
I am, yes. I've been friends with Joe Biden for a long time. When he was in the Senate and I was in office, he was so unbelievably, truly supportive and helpful of foreign policy, really has a very deep understanding of it. And what I really like about him, among other things, is his understanding of how domestic and foreign policy go together. which is something, whether you're in the executive or legislative branch, that's important in terms of how our policies are thought up and then how they're carried out. And so I have been in touch with him.
What would you expect to see, or what should we expect to see day one, the new Joe Biden administration?
Well, I think he has said some things where he's really going to come out with an economic plan, that he really wants to do something strongly about that. That he does think that there has been a whole group of people that have been left out of the burgeoning economy and health programs and education. I think also that he will certainly get congratulatory phone calls from the foreign leaders, many of whom he really knows well because he dealt with them, and that they will establish relationships. And I'm hoping that he will and there's every reason to think this, is that he will understand the importance of a partnership internationally, which is good for the American people as we deal with international problems. And really, I hope that he will really refurbish our image and work with other countries for our good. That's what the President of the United States is supposed to protect: our people, our territory, and our way of life. And that requires partnership with other countries. And that is something that Joe Biden knows how to do very, very well.
Paris Climate Accords?
Yes.
Back in day one?
Well, I hope so, or something like it. You know,
Yeah.
it's hard to resurrect it completely, but he clearly understands the importance of climate change and how it affects the populations and our industries and everything. So I think that he truly is probably the most knowledgeable person to be ready to become president of the United States when you think about the various things that he's done in his life.
And the Iran nuclear accord, is it possible to resurrect that, to restart it?
Well, I think that it has to be looked at again. I'm very troubled by the things that have happened in the last couple of months, where it's evident that the Iranians are in fact doing something to restore their enrichment capabilities, and where there is action or non-action in the Security Council trying to figure out what to do about the sanctions. But I think one of the huge mistakes by the Trump administration was pulling out unilaterally from that agreement, and the way that it not only affected us, but our allies, and obviously the whole situation in the Middle East.
And finally, a little lightning round of your response to some people who are on the world stage today. Just a couple of comments about each, if you agree. Let's start with Secretary of State Pompeo. How do you rate the job he's doing?
I think a little mixed, frankly. I have not talked to him at all, except for the first day when I congratulated him. And I think it's
And he
very...
fired you, right?
What?
And he fired you from some
Well,
advisory
he fired
board?
me from... I was on the CIA External Advisory Board that Leon Panetta
Oh,
had
that
asked
was
me
the
to be on.
CIA, right?
Yeah, and then he also... I was kept by Petraeus and Brennan and everybody, and it wasn't until all of a sudden I got a call from Pompeo. But I think that part of the problem is that there needs to be some predictability in our foreign policy. And I think Trump makes it hard for the Secretary of State to be predictable and at the same time to have a functioning relationship. But the kinds of things that have been happening, I think, do not speak really well for the kind of really organized kind of national security policy that one would like to see.
How about Bibi Netanyahu?
Very difficult person, and somebody that I used to have to keep telling President Clinton, just because he sounds like an American, he is not an American political person, and we treat him as if he were in many ways. I think that I did not enjoy working with him, I have to say, and I'm very troubled by some of the things that are going on. I'm a great supporter of Israel, but I do think that I'm worried about the annexation program or plan, and just the way that he treats the neighbors.
What problem? What was his problem with Obama? I was covering the White House. I couldn't understand. It seemed to me that Obama was giving him everything he wanted, and he just gave Obama nothing but grief.
I have no idea, but I found him a very difficult person to deal with.
Here's another person you're closer to. How about your take on Susan Rice?
Well, Susan Rice, I have known since she was a little girl. First of all, I was really good friends with her mother, Lois Rice, because we did a lot of things together. And actually, Susan is in age between my twins and my youngest daughter. And we all and my former husband played tennis with her father, and we spent a lot of time together. So I have known Susan for a very long time. I think she is an incredibly capable person. Officially, we kind of, she was in the White House in the National Security Council staff for President Clinton. And then when I was in office, she was Assistant Secretary for African Affairs. She was terrific in that. And she is really, really smart and a very capable human being.
Is she your top choice for vice president?
I'm not saying who my choice is. I decided to stay out of that. I just am very glad that there are good choices to be made, and that Vice President Biden did commit himself to having a woman.
Who is the leader of the free world today, do you believe?
And that's a hard question. I actually think probably Angela Merkel in so many ways, in the way she thinks. And she is steady. She works well with others. They are president of the G7 at the moment. And I think she's a really very careful and smart political person. And I'm sorry that she's decided that she's not going to stay in office for more than a year.
When you look around the world today, Madam Secretary, what do you see as the greatest threat from the foreign policy point of view to the United States today?
Well, I think the greatest threat is, in many ways, our behavior, if I may say so, and I've said that. But I do think are kind of what the whole issue is on intelligence as a whole. How hacking, the various technology, cyber weapons, that we have really no rules for the whole intelligence sector and the trading of information, and then also how cyber works. We're having a lot of trouble at the moment even getting normal arms control agreements. But I think that the whole issue of cyber, the offense and the defense, and understanding how artificial intelligence does work, will work, who penetrates whose country, all those kinds of aspects in terms of that know no borders. I also do think that the virus and what it has done in not only in terms of health, but kind of making clear that we don't have good systems to try to deal with something that knows no borders.
And how would you rate, finally, the response of the United States to the coronavirus pandemic, to what some of our other countries, particularly our allies, have done?
Well, I think we've screwed up. I am so tired of the president taking credit for the best whatever. It's the worst country now in terms of what the number of cases, the disagreements in terms of what the guidelines are, trying to figure out how the governments relate to the people and the economy. And there are other countries that have done very well. By the way, what's interesting, some of the countries that really have done well are the ones that are run by women. So New Zealand and Taiwan, Germany, Denmark, Norway, Iceland. I think that's they all have women leaders.
Is there I had to ask at the end of reading your book, is there any part of the world you haven't been to? I mean,
I've
literally,
pretty much been everywhere. I have. I
Yeah.
lost count of the number of countries. And when I was out of office, I actually went to the Arctic on a trip that Aspen and National Geographic sponsored. I haven't been to the Antarctic, but I have been in an awful lot of places.
So again, the book Hell and Other Destinations recounts a lot of the activities that you're involved in, a lot of the, including public speaking, including writing books, including going on book tours. Um, you learned early on that as an author, you're not always in control of how and when you are scheduled to speak at book conferences, like one of the first ones you went to with Madam Secretary in Arizona at a booksellers conference. Do you remember that
Oh,
story?
yes. When I came, I was asked to speak after somebody talked about how to pee, you know,
For
so
a kid's book, right?
kids' book. And then I did compare foreign policy a little bit to dealing with children, little toilet training.
A little total training going a long way,
Yeah.
right? You also tell us about your experience when you were and accepted a position on the New York Stock Exchange, of all places.
Well, I write about it because it is one of the things where saying yes was a mistake. What happened was that I was out of office. I had a friend who was a member of the stock exchange, and he went to Dick Grasso to suggest me. So Dick Grasso, who was the CEO, called me up and he said, come up and see me. So I went. I did ring the bell, but then he said that his Democratic slots were already taken, which I thought was kind of weird. And then there was an article about how high his pay was. So all of a sudden I get a phone call saying that he changed his mind and he thought he might want me on the stock exchange. And I said, well, maybe I've changed my mind. So then I decided to call Senator Sarbanes, who had really taken an interest in what were the right things to do. And he said, no, it'd be good, Madeleine, if you did it because it could be part of your public service. So the story that really blew my mind was, and I write about this, is I always try to be at meetings in person, but the scheduling was hard. And so I was at a meeting that was part of the, the governance committee. And there was kind of a semi-open hearing with some members of the stock exchange, and I'm on the phone. And this man says, we don't need some former Secretary of State, some St. Francis of Assisi on this board. And I said, excuse me, but I'm on the phone. And he said, well, that's perfectly fine, Madam Secretary, because as far as I know, you have no financial experience. And I said, well, that may be true, but I have solved a few problems. And then somebody else around the table said, and she can learn. And the same man said, yeah, and you can teach a monkey to play the piano.
Whoa.
And I said, I've never been called St. Francis of Assisi and a monkey in the same conversation. So that's kind of how I was welcomed to this particular group. But I did learn a lot. But I think I really was the mistake that I made, and I do try to describe it fairly clearly.
You also talk about being invited by Lesley Stahl for an interview on 60 Minutes after in a newspaper headline referred to you with the question, war criminal or role model?
Yeah.
That must
Well,
have.
I tell you something that I think most people don't know. I was at the UN, and I was an instructed ambassador, by the way. And what happened was that it was right after the Gulf War, and the ceasefire was translated into a series of sanctions resolutions. And my instructions were to make sure that the sanctions stayed on. So, and they were very wide-ranging sanctions, the toughest sanctions that we've had on any country. We learned a lot of lessons from that. But one of the things that I think the public doesn't know is you go on a program like that and you don't know what what's called the B-roll is ahead of when you speak. And all of a sudden there were these terrible news about people suffering as a result of what we had done. And I'm trying to explain how the whole thing worked and not getting very far in terms of how the whole process of the sanctions works. And Lesley then asked me, did I think it was worth the life of, at that stage, 500,000 children? And I thought I had answered everything, that it was not our fault. But I did, and I think, I don't know whether anybody has ever not said something stupid that they wish they hadn't said. I so wish I hadn't said what I said, that it was okay. It's the stupidest thing I ever said. I have apologized for it. I can't tell you how many times, but there is some kind of a cottage industry that wants to keep it alive. The bottom line is the UN and various people since have said that the numbers were totally incorrect. That didn't happen. But I wish I hadn't said it. And it makes me truly realize that you have to think before you speak.
I was very struck, Madam Secretary, by particularly one chapter where you talked about the role of religion when it comes to foreign policy and the role religion has played throughout the centuries, actually. One would think that with the role of religion involved, that would sort of temper and soothe foreign policy. It's been just about the opposite, hasn't it?
Well, it has. And by the way, we believe in the separation of church and state. And one of the things that I learned when I was secretary was the role that religion was playing in national security policy. And a lot of the things that we were dealing with in the Middle East or in Afghanistan. And what I didn't think that Americans knew an awful lot about Islam, much less the difference between the Shia and Sunni. And so I spent a lot of time studying, trying to figure out what Islam really was doing. I was the first one to put Muslim holidays on the official calendar. We had iftar dinners, trying to sort out what the role of religion was. And then I did write a book about the role of religion, and the mighty and the almighty, because while you may want to separate church and state, there's no question that religion has played a very large role in some of the issues that are going on now in the Middle East, for instance, the Shia versus the Sunni, which is really the Arabs versus the Persians, or what the Taliban has done in Afghanistan. And I do think it means understanding religion, which has also played a role in the Balkans. A couple of days ago, on July 11th, was the anniversary of what had happened in Srebrenica when the Serbs, who are Orthodox, there was a slaughtering of the Muslims that lived in Srebrenica. And so as I was getting more and more involved in national security policy, it was very clear to me that religion played a very large part, and it was important to understand the basis of some of the struggles that are going on.
Clearly, your Czech heritage plays a very large role, too, in your life and in your story, your life story. And if there's one individual that comes across maybe number one in your book that influenced you or impressed you, it's Václav Havel.
For sure. Really amazing because, well, the Czech part is very important to me. And I grew up, I am bilingual, and I am very interested in how the country was formed. By the way, the country would not exist if it hadn't been for Woodrow Wilson and the 14 points and self-determination. And so very much identified with the United States in terms of the Czechoslovak Constitution was modeled on the American one, except that it had equal rights language in it in 1918. But I had obviously heard about Václav Havel and read some of his plays. And what happened was that I had gone to Czechoslovakia, which it was called, in the 80s as part of a USIA program. And then later I went as representing the National Democratic Institute because we wanted to help them after the Velvet Revolution. So I am in his office. I had a copy of the book that my father had written, 20th Century Czechoslovakia, and I'm handing it to him. And he says, "I know who you are. You're Mrs. Fulbright." And I said, "No, I'm Mrs. Albright." And so that was the beginning of a great friendship. When he came to the United States, I did the advance work for it. And I spent a lot of time with him over the years. And he truly was one of the most remarkable people I ever met in terms of his humility, his philosophical approach, his love of democracy. And then I have been rereading one of his most famous essays, The Power of the Powerless, the importance of living in truth. So it was a very exceptional relationship. And he did an awful lot to kind of resurrect Czechoslovakia's reputation after a lot of time run by the communists.
And I thought the most powerful part of your book is where you talk about something you had talked about before. I think maybe the last time we were together, is that rather well along in your life, you discover the full story of your Czech heritage, which included the fact that your family was Jewish and that so many of your direct family members, including three grandparents, I believe, perished in the Holocaust. And that led to later the discovery of your grandmother's journal written before she
Yep.
was sent off to prison, which was just really mind-blowing. What did that mean to you to discover that journal?
Well, the journal, I'll tell you, it makes us, my family and me, seem particularly disorganized. What happened was my father died in 1977, and my mother moved to Washington at a certain stage after she has scleroderma and couldn't breathe in Colorado. So she said there's more to life than breathing. But anyway, she moved to Washington and she brought all my father's papers.
Hmm.
And then when she died in 1979, 1989, all the papers, they were brought over to my house. And I had them in the garage. And I didn't really, my father was working on a book when he died about the Czechoslovak legionnaires, and my mother wanted me to finish it, and I didn't want to do that. And anyway, I did not look in these boxes at all. And then I become UN ambassador and secretary of state, and I have security. And they moved into my house, and they said, and the garage, and they said, we have to put these boxes somewhere. So I had all these boxes stored in a public storage space. And then in the 2013-14, I needed something from the storage, and I went there and I started going through the boxes, and all of a sudden I find this manila envelope and I open it, and there is this journal from my grandmother. And I couldn't believe it. And as I began to read it, it was like a message in a bottle. And I'm really very glad that they were able to put it in this book, because she was writing this journal. My parents, we escaped Czechoslovakia when the Nazis marched in. I spent the war in England with my parents all through the Blitz. And I didn't, I was 2 years old, and we come back to Czechoslovakia, and I didn't have any relationship with my grandparents or anything. I didn't know what had happened to them. And so finding this journal and the fact that this particular grandmother had spent her life there in a little town, Podjebrady, and the journal is basically written for my mother to explain what had gone on. And then this is the part, as I found out more and more about her, remember I just said I thought my grandparents were old when they died. My grandmother was 54 years old when she was killed in a concentration camp. And so I do now know that 26 members of my family died in concentration camps. And 3 years ago, I took my children and grandchildren to Theresienstadt to show them what it was like. And we dedicated this particular plaque to those who had died. So it was one thing to find out I was Jewish. It was another to find out how many members of my family had died as a result of the Holocaust.
And it seems, I know the journal was written to your mother. It seems reading it that she was speaking to you.
Well, it is kind of cross-generational and very interesting, which is why I do kind of talk about it as a message in a bottle, because despite what was going on, she had so much hope. That was the part that I found so inspiring.
You say that I think, and it comes across, the central theme of your book, seems to me, I'd like to know what you want people to take away from the book, but the message that I got was that we can make a difference if we work together on solving problems. I mean, I think the last time we were together at the Hill Center, you used the phrase, see something, say something, do something.
Right.
That's always the third part, which some people leave out.
No, I do think that it's very important. I also say very clearly, it took me a long time to find my voice. And so I'm not going to be quiet now. And I really do think that what is important about democracy is our resiliency and our capability of working together. The other part that is a lesson now, and really, even though the book was written before all of this, the whole virus that's going on, is that my parents during the war had no control over where the bombs fell. The only thing they had control over was their behavior. We now don't have control over how the virus began, but we do have control over our behavior. And our behavior does involve working together to solve a problem, and how we attack the issues and how we show our innovative capabilities and our resiliency.
So you're still an optimist?
I am. You know, I was just I was at a dinner, I was asked to describe myself in 6 words. Worried optimist, problem solver, grateful American. And that does describe how I feel.
I think that's pretty damn good, right? I think you can wear that badge with honor. But speaking of wearing with honor, I don't know whether the camera can pull back a little bit or you could lean back, but do I see a V pin you're wearing today?
Yes. And I'll tell you what this is about. I was actually going to wear a devil when this book started, but this came up for the following reason. What happened was that my father, when we were in London during the war, he worked with the government in exile and he broadcast over BBC.
Uh-huh.
And I listened to BBC. I was a little girl. I actually thought he was in the radio. But every BBC broadcast began with a kettle drum, which are the first 5 notes of Beethoven's Fifth, da-da-da-dum, which in Morse code is V for victory. And so I thought it made sense to wear it.
Bravo. Yeah. I didn't know that at all.
Yeah.
And certainly the people listening to the BBC realized what the BBC message
Yeah.
the BBC was sending at the time, right?
Yes, I think so. I believe so. Yeah.
Will prevail. Again, the book, Madeleine Albright, Secretary Albright, Hell and Other Destinations, a 21st century memoir. The second memoir, more to follow, probably for sure, as her very interesting and active life continues. And don't forget, as Charlotte mentioned, East City Books, rather, has managed to make this available for your purchase. So just go on to the notes for this website or to this broadcast from the Hill Center or to the website for East City Books. I strongly recommend it. You'll love it as much as I did. Buy the book, read the book, enjoy the book. And while you're at it, also, this is the 4th month now that the Hill Center has not been able to entertain people on site. So it's it's nice that you continue to follow our programs, but it would also be great if you could send a little help the Hill Center's way so they can continue to keep their core staff there and keep the good programs coming to you. And with that, we thank you for listening. And Secretary Albright, thank you so much for joining us. We owe you another dinner at Rosa's Luxury as soon as this lifts and we can get back together again.
I'm looking forward to it, Bill. Thank you so much always for a great conversation.
You're a great friend. Thanks so much, Madam Secretary.